This is Off Topic, a show where two men with the attention spans of a squirrel try and fail to stay on topic with today's subject. Where will their oral meanderings take us? Well, stick around and listen, because today's Off topic is... Antonio Barrakevich, or he's much more commonly known as the Great Antonio, famous strongman, wrestler, and Montreal's favorite eccentric son. Nate, what do you know about the Great Antonio?
Jack shit. Aside from the fact that now that you said his full name, I assume he's Eastern European of some sort, but that's not knowledge, that's a guess.
That's actually a pretty good guess, because you'd be correct. And we're going to learn that and so much more about him, too, because I literally knew nothing about him until I just saw a little article pop up and was like, hey, did you know this guy existed? And I was like, I sure didn't. And it's like, well, you want to learn? And I went, yay! And then I learned, and now we get to learn, too, along with me.
One of these days, people are like, do you want to learn? Yay! And I wish I never had. Every day I cut myself a little bit. So I was hopefully one day I'll bleed out the knowledge that I have learned.
Just sitting in a corner rocking back and forth. Too much knowledge, too much knowledge, too much knowledge. If you think about that, it'd be really awful if all of a sudden you got all the knowledge that could ever be known pumped into your head. That means you know what your biker neighbor's butthole tastes like.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, there'd be people always forget. They're like, I want all the knowledge. Like, do you though?
Do you really? Do you want to know what your parents were doing on their wedding night? I don't think you do.
I think you want all the pertinent knowledge. Yeah. You know what? All the knowledge.
So Antonio, or the Great Antonio, he's a man of tall tales, Herculean exploits of strengths, but most importantly, what he's kind of known for nowadays is a wrestling match that was brutal enough that Bill Burr did a routine on it some 40 years later.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Bill Burr even talks about him, and we'll get into that a little bit later.
I both like and dislike Bill Burr. There are certain things I absolutely love Bill Burr, but sometimes I'm like, But I mean, that can be said by everybody. There are things
that's
I like
true.
About, that's I guess that statement was actually pretty fucking stupid. But overall, though, I do enjoy Bill Burr.
I sure do like that person, other than when I don't. Deep Thoughts with Nathan Townsend.
Right?
That sure was good until it wasn't.
That reminds me of my favorite. There was it Tiny Toons, and they were doing like a generic like things, and one of the generic like blurbs of this movie was like, I laughed till I stopped.
No specification on how much of laughing it was, just right. Laugh till you stop. It's like, huh.
It's a movie.
So our story begins in one of the coolest named places ever that I can think of. Antonio was born in the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slavens, or what's now known as Yugoslavia, Kingdom of the Adidas track pants and Yugo automobile. But you gotta admit, anything that starts out with the Kingdom of sounds pretty cool.
That's true. Even for the awful ones, it's still the Kingdom of, like, ooh, that's fancy.
Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slavens. I like it. Whoever changed to Yugoslavia kind of dropped the ball, I feel. Yugoslavia is not quite as powerful.
No, it really isn't.
Antonio was so massive upon birth that it took up most of the month of October, as his birthday has been listed as the 5th, the 15th, and the 25th of October in 1925. I'm guessing the discrepancy on this is because it was rural 1925 where he was born. Probably not a lot of hospitals or birth certificates going on, so, they're probably just like, hey, when were you born? I don't know, October. I think there's a 5 in there somewhere. We know very little about his years in Europe, as he didn't talk much about his youth. All he would really talk about when it came to his younger years was his amazing feats of strength that he would do. He said that he was unusually large and strong as a child, and at the age of 6, his parents gave him a shovel and a pickaxe and told him to get to work. And work he did, growing bigger and stronger by the day. At the age of 12, he says he was strong enough that they would tie cables around his neck and he would pull trees and stumps out by the roots.
That doesn't sound like that's. I mean, that's if you brag about that nowadays. Hey, guess what? My kid's so strong. I wrapped a cord around his neck and forced him to pull up tree roots.
Yep. Like, what? Things that would fly 100 years ago that don't quite fly nowadays.
And where would they think? Oh, hey, let's not have him pull it or around his waist where his neck.
His neck. It's the most impressive looking part of his body, I guess, or more impressive pulling it by your neck than, I don't know, your waist.
Either that or parents would low key try to kill him. Like, this will
They-
asshole. Let's go ahead and make him like that way when the cops come. Like, he just killed himself. I don't know why.
Yeah, kids were expensive to feed, and I mean, he
Right.
did have 4 brothers and sisters, so there is a chance they were just trying to work him to death.
Yeah, way back in the day, maybe they're trying to make food. Like, go pull
Working
out this
makes
root
the
in your
muscles
neck.
tasty.
Pull this out of your neck. Go forth, future dinner, and pull that thing out.
As a teenager, he said he could run an endurance race for 24 hours straight without stopping. Which, when I first heard that, I was like, that doesn't sound like something people could do. But actually, 24-hour endurance races on foot are an actual thing that people do.
Damn.
Yeah. Apparently, you need to train up properly to do it, but it is possible for people to run 24 hours straight. It's all about pacing yourself, I guess, which seems pretty obvious.
Keyword people, not me.
Yeah. Yeah, right. But those few talking points is about all that he would speak of his youth. He was pretty tight-lipped on his upbringing, and kind of probably the reason everybody thinks why is because guess what happened in his teenage years, Nate? You want to take a guess what happened in Eastern Europe sometime around, the 30s?
Oh, World War One. Was he alive at World War One?
No, World War II broke out.
Oh,
Or I
I'm
guess
sorry,
late
20s.
30s.
I'm sorry. When I think World War II, I always think 40s, but you're absolutely right. It started in the 30s.
Yep. Yeah, we didn't get involved into it until the 40s, but Eastern Europe was a big old crackling hotbed of fun.
Yeah, my dumb head cut to well, it was before the 40s, so not World War II. Nope, I was wrong.
Yep. And the capital of the Kingdom of Croats, Slovens, and yada, 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 or Yugoslavia as it's known right now. The capital of Zagreb, where he lived, decided to side with the German and Italians. And that led to a whole lot of rebellions and riots going on in the city. So basically, the town that Antonio was living in was both getting invaded by allies and invaded by rebels and this and that. So probably a pretty stressful time to be alive around then.
Yeah, I would imagine. Rocket hard place.
And then at the end of World War II, he found himself at the Bagnoli Displaced Persons Camp, or as some people would call it, a concentration camp. And why would some people call it a displaced persons camp and others concentration camp, Nate? Got any ideas? Because, I mean, this happened after the war was over that he got put in a quote-unquote concentration camp.
My guess is marketing.
Actually, that's why it's called this displaced persons camp, probably. I'll let you know why some people call it concentration camp, because Camp Bagnoli was involved in Project Keelhaul. You ever heard of Project Keelhaul?
No, but I've heard pirates say it.
Yeah, keel hauling is actually the act when you drag somebody from the front of the ship underneath the back, through the back underneath it, and you basically get dragged across the barnacles on the bottom of the ship and cut up and shredded.
Oh, there you go. I just assumed it was like a way to say kill with that accent, but I guess that's also true.
Yeah, it kind of is.
They're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, both things could be correct. Well, Project Keelhaul actually didn't really have anything to do with a boat, per se, but long story short, after World War II ended, the Russians had a lot of Allied POWs in their possessions that they had liberated from German camps and POW camps. Well, the Allies went to the Russians and said, hey, you got a bunch of our POWs. Can we have them back? And Russia said, yeah, we can do that, but there's a lot of paperwork and time involved, so we're going to need something in return. And the Allies said, hey, what you need? We'd really like those POWs back. And Russia said, hey, during this whole, communist takeover thing that's been going on over the last several, decades or whatever, a whole lot of people fled not fled, they, quote unquote, got displaced. We would love for you to go out and grab all these, quote unquote, displaced Russians and send them back to us so we can, quote unquote, repatriate them. And the Allies were like, so is it like a specific list of Russians you want sent back? And the Russians said, nope. Find any Russian you can in Europe and just send them back to us, and we will handle it after that. So basically, they were trying to get all the people who defected during those years so they could get them back and do bad stuff to them. But they're like, hey, even if this person has a letter straight from Stalin saying, I give you permission to leave this country, you send them right back to us. The Allies said, okay, we could probably do that. And then the Russians followed up by saying, hey, here's what you do. You start sending all these people to these various camps all around Eastern Europe, and then from there you can load them on all these trains and then send them off to Russia where we will take care of them. And the Allies said, wow, fancy you should mention that because we just learned about this whole system of rounding up people, putting them in camps and sending them off on trains. We'll get right on that. So, several quote-unquote displaced people's camps for Russians popped up, and they were all sent back to Russia where they were then executed or stuck in the military or just sent off to a gulag. They say between 750,000 to 3 million Russians were rounded up and sent to Russia because of this. And to top it off, even the Allies will admit there was a few thousand clerical errors that sent non-Russians off to the gulags too. So, anyways, this joyous scene was one that great Antonio was in the middle of in 1945. So that seems like kind of a shitty place to be honest.
Yeah, that's no bueno.
Yeah. So I'll ask you though.
French. What are you doing?
Yeah. Well, the paperwork here says you're Russian. Like, no. Get on the boat or get on the train. Bye. So I'll ask you, Nate, is that a displaced persons camp or a concentration camp?
Yeah. I think it's a concentration camp. Why not?
Yeah.
Skip it.
Keep in mind there were some actual displaced people there because Antonio was one of those. Why was he displaced? I don't know. Family got murdered, house burned down, who knows? But what happened was he hung out at the Bagnoli camp for a little while, and then he found himself immigrating to Nova Scotia over in Canada. There, he found himself working at a scrap metal and wrecking yard at the port of Halifax, where he exchanged labor for room and board. Basically, he worked in a giant scrapyard, and over in the corner of the scrapyard, he built himself like a little ramshackle house out of nothing but like car parts and old cinder blocks and corrugated roofing. And basically just lived in that little tiny homemade cabin and just moved metal all day long, thus increasing his strength. So eventually the 6'4" Antonio got stronger, bigger, faster, harder, so on and so forth. And actually, if you look at the pictures, also, if you're listening in and I leave in these parts where we're talking about pictures, just go onto your favorite search engine and image search The Great Antonio, and you'll get all these pictures up. They're pretty common. The very first picture you see up the left-hand corner, that's what he looked like when he got off the boat. As you can see, somewhat of a young svelte man.
Yeah, I mean,
by the way, I'm good.
He looks strong, but not like, I mean, hell, I know nowadays is different, like standards are different, and they also have like, let's say pharmaceuticals to help. But like The Rock is massively bigger than that dude.
Yeah, he is. But also The Rock does a lot of steroids too, so.
Well, that's pharmaceutically helped.
Yeah, because actual like the steroids we would think of them didn't really come out until like the 60s, I think, or almost the 70s. So we go back to Nova Scotia. The big burly Antonio, at this point he's 6'4" and like 300 pounds is what he was saying, I believe. And he looked into the mirror and said, "Hey, I'm a pretty burly guy. Maybe I can make some money from this strength of mine." So Antonio, who is, as you saw just a moment ago, is clean cut, decided to take on a more marketable wild man personality and started to grow his hair out long and started to act kind of all weird and goofy and eccentric. He initially started out showing off feats of strength to nearby dock workers, taking on dares and bets and showing off what he's made of. Made himself some extra money doing that too. We are currently in the early 1950s, and word of mouth has spread interest in this wild strongman from across the sea, and this led him to be able to do public displays of strength for fun and profit. Things he was known for doing: bending steel bars with his bare hands, picking up people, lifting up cars, pulling multiple cars full of people, pulling a car full of people with his hair. That's the second picture you saw there. Apparently, he had some pretty robust hair that he would like to attach stuff to and then use his head and neck to pull things. Sort of like he did as a child when they cabled him to a tree and was like, "Hey, escape this if you can," or whatever they did.
Man, people are just a lot more, like, I understand it. Like, there wasn't like the Avengers movies, so I get it. But people just seemed in general to be a lot. It didn't take a lot to amuse people. It didn't take enough like really people would just give their money up. Like, oh, look at that guy. He I don't know. He kissed a horse. Let's give $1,000.
The man who kissed 100 horses in an hour. Come watch the man who kissed 100 different horses. Can you believe it, people? And there's just like literally like 1,000 people lined up to watch. I know what you mean. I think maybe it was all the lead poisoning and alcohol back then that they were doing.
Something.
Yeah. So, but you're right. It kind of goes back to us talking about parades where it's like, hey, parades were neat for the time, I guess, when you guys see, the 3 cars in the valley come around. But there's also a photo of him, and he basically has a log the size of a telephone pole that's sitting on his shoulder. Well, he has 13 people hanging off of this log all at once. It's actually a pretty impressive sight.
Oh, yeah, that's actually now that's impressive. Like, I don't know, for some.
Yeah, that is legitimately him holding a log with 13 people on it, and
I mean the pull on the car with the hair thing. I mean, yeah, sure. You know what? Yeah, okay. Of course. Yeah, I saw some dude, like, if I walked outside, I saw some guy, like, pulling, like, trying to push start their car by pulling it with their hair. Dude, I'd
She'd be
be very
like, "Girls,
impressed.
get back inside. This is
Yeah,
something's
right.
wrong here."
I mean, I wouldn't give him any money, but I'd be like, oh, sweet. But yeah, this is actually legitimately impressive.
I mean, those are like full grown dudes too, hanging off that too. It's not like a bunch of little kids.
Right. I mean,
Yeah,
again, it's impressive you know, just the tree itself is impressive, but with all those people on there as well.
yeah, right. Honestly, looking at that picture kind of makes my shoulder and my neck hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really does.
I mean, it does kind of remind me of the beginning of Commando, but Arnold Schwarzenegger didn't also have like a bunch of people hanging off of it.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if The Rock could do a feat of strength like this.
Uh,
Because if there's one thing I have learned over the years is there is a difference between visible, good-looking muscles and like usable "I'm strong as fuck" muscles.
right. I mean, that's the thing. Like the truly strongman, like the strongman competition, they don't look like The Rock.
Yeah,
They
they're
look
all a
like
bunch of like kind of pot-belly looking
yeah,
dudes.
they look like a giant thumb.
Yeah,
'Cause,
yeah, they do, and then they're just picking up these giant like 800-pound boulders and
yeah,
moving them, and you're like, oh,
like no, those guys are legitimately strong. I mean, the guy who played the Mountain on Game of Thrones, who I'm blanking on his name, he actually like pulls off a little bit of both. But he does like he is a legitimate strongman. He's also a huge, but he also still has some cut to him. He's not cut like The Rock. We keep on referencing The Rock. Surely there's someone else I can think of that's just as muscular, but I can't think of it right now. Um, he is legitimately like scary looking and huge. And on another side note, just kind of branch off that again. We're going off topic. Have you seen that dude's girlfriend? Do you know who? First of all, do you know what I'm talking about?
is that the one where she's like 3 feet tall or something like that?
Well, she's not 3 feet tall, but like she reached barely above his waist. And
Yeah,
I'm
it's like the
like,
picture of Shaq with his girlfriend.
yeah, it's like, okay, I hope for her sake, it's not like, you know, I don't know, more average down there versus like, as big. I don't know. Like if there's some kind of, I don't know how to say this, but I hope he's not
If he's
tearing her half.
if he's hugged to his knees, then that's about 2/3 of her body size. So
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, you're like, I'm not being a perv. I'm just medically
no,
curious on how this works.
totally. I don't want to see it. I'm good. I'm just curious if what's the word I'm looking for? I'm totally why is the proportionate? That's what it is. If like it's proportionate because if someone hit me with a grow ray and I grew up like I have like 1.5, 2 times where I was about as big as he is, not 2 times. Let's say like a half, even as big as he is, and let's say all parts of me grew, that would still be like I don't know, whatever. Let's walk away from this. I'm taking a step back. I'm gonna sit down right here and just take a step back and go. Let's just move on. It'd be like me. I pick up something gross. It's like in the middle of the street. I kind of look both ways. I sit it down, take a step back, and just walk away whistling. Like, never mind.
We'll just pretend that didn't happen. So there was an ad I saw. It was actually in a video, and I couldn't find a copy of it to send you. But there's an advertisement for him showing up at a strongman competition, and the ad stated that if he locked his arms at his side, like kind of picture him doing like the chicken dance sort of thing, just having his arms out like that. And if they hooked ropes to it, 10 horses can't open his arms for 15 minutes 4 seconds, and 2 jeeps can't open his arms for 10 minutes 5 seconds. Which I guess if you do math, that means horses are 2/3 as strong as a jeep. I don't know. But also, I guess impressive.
Yeah.
No actual video of that, sadly. There is actual video of that one picture of him pulling the car with his hair. You can actually see him doing that in person. And if you're thinking about maybe he was some sort of con man in some ways and some of these pictures were fake or whatever, well, the Guinness Book of World Records was there in 1952 to verify that he pulled a 433 metric ton train down the tracks at a distance of 19.8 meters. And if you'd like that in freedom units, that's 426 ton train for 65 feet. That's pretty impressive.
Quite impressive. Impressive. Most impressive.
Yeah. Guinness was also there again in 1960 when he pulled 4 city buses that were loaded with passengers down the streets of Montreal. That's also pretty impressive.
But then again, Guinness Book of World Records is like it used to be. It used to mean something. Like back in the day, it used to mean something. Nowadays, I don't know. Like apparently anybody can do anything.
Yeah, it's like
reason.
Most hours working on a Rubik's Cube without solving it kind of world records.
Right.
Like, is that really a record? Is that really?
There was actually John Oliver did a bit on Guinness Book of World Records, and basically all these like totalitarian countries and stuff are having them come out, just kind of like, oh look, this way they'll remember all the people we murdered. Look, we made we made the giantest cake ever. So apparently, you throw enough money at Guinness Book of World Records, they'd be like, okay, yeah, sure, he did that.
Sure, yeah, you can have the largest in-ground mass grave ever made. Sure,
yay! Wow, that's super impressive.
But yeah, I agree. Sometimes it's like, hey, the longest somebody ever whistled while getting pelted with water balloons is now stuff like that they do. It's like, well, that's not really a record. As far as getting people out to watch Antonio pull those buses for the Guinness Book of World Records, in order to drum up interest for this, they ran stories claiming Antonio was just like going up to random buses in the street, like telling the bus driver, no, you're not driving. I'm pulling this bus on its route, and would just like pull the bus a few blocks down the road with people on it. This was actually made up, of course, but you know, you got to drum up interest somehow.
Absolutely.
So Antonio was a big dude at 6'4", and at his biggest weight, up to 500 pounds as an adult. And what do big, strong dudes with personalities often become? Pro wrestlers. Woo! During the 50s, he started professional wrestling as Narcissus, or Sweet Narcissus, and would often wrestle at the same sideshows that showed off his feat of strength. His natural charisma, size, and strength made him a fan favorite at small wrestling shows and venues. Yeah, basically he would do kind of like a strongman act and then be like, hey, you want to watch me wrestle like 3 guys after this? I'll go do that. Or, you know, wrestle oncomers, kind of like back when you used to be able to do that kind of stuff. It was also back in the day where, you know, you could just kind of like walk into a wrestling ring and just be like, hey, I'm going to try this now. I don't think you can really do that like, so much.
No, oh yeah, no. Nowadays, like security.
Yeah, right.
This crazy person just like walked in the ring and just said, hey, I'll take on all covers.
Yeah. Back in the 50s, I'm pretty sure if you're just big enough, you could walk into a wrestling venue and they'd just be like, all right, give it a shot. Worst thing that happen is you're going to kill somebody or get killed.
And then they leave the next day. It's like, okay, let's go. Just leave the corpse in the middle of the ring.
When it comes to his name, he started out as the Narcissus character, but by 1961, he decided to go with the Great Antonio, the Wild Man of Europe. And he would often be led to his the ring by quote-unquote handlers or his managers, and he'd have chains all around him and, you know, just be like, oh, we have to hold this man back with these chains. Look at him. He's just like, rah, 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 I attack. And then, you know, unleash the wild man. He goes to town on people. You can actually see a picture of him with his little wild man chains. And 3rd picture down. 4th picture.
There he is. Yep. No, I mean, that looks dated. He has a hook on it.
Oh, he sure does, actually, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's like the wild man. He keeps on winning. We don't know why. It's like, I don't know. Maybe it has something to do with the fucking hook at the end of that chain.
He looks like he could be like a boss from Bloodborne or something.
Right.
Throwing a hook chain.
He looks legitimately dangerous.
He does.
Steve, you ever see that Steve Martin sketch from old school SNL where they were like doing? Yes, exactly. You know exactly where I was going. That's awesome. Yeah, it's like the only guy out there with a gun. It's like, well, the rules didn't explicitly state you couldn't do that. So.
Yeah, they called me the gun because I had a gun for an arm and I also carried a gun out on the field. And people were just like, I don't know. He just pulled out the gun and we just didn't know what to do.
Oh God.
Yeah, that is a good sketch. Antonio's Wild Man of Europe shtick was exactly what a certain legendary Japanese wrestler was looking for to bolster his image. Enter Rikidozan, Japanese wrestling legend. Now, you probably haven't heard of Rikidozan, but he's basically the guy who's credited with bringing pro wrestling to Japan. He established the Japan Pro Wrestling Alliance, the first professional wrestling promotion in 1953, and was easily the biggest wrestling star of Japan during his time, and one of the most famous and influential wrestlers ever in any country. He was actually huge in Japan, too. He was like doing all sorts of acting and stuff. You know, it was like, ooh, Rikidozan on a surfing movie. Dude was huge. He was also the first Japanese wrestler to be booked as a good guy in the USA post-World War II.
Oh, nice. That's actually impressive.
That is actually pretty impressive. Basically, the way he was able to get that rub is when the Americans came over and wrestled, he showed them so much respect and put them over so well that when he came back to America with them, they're like, hey, we got to put this guy over. He's just a good working dude. Yeah,
I will say, you know, when you, of course, hear horror stories about wrestling, and particularly with management and stuff. I mean, Vince McMahon, exactly. Like, let's just say, dude's going like straight to hell. Not even like the moment he closes his eyes, there's not even gonna be like a judgment. He's just gonna be like, he's gonna close his eyes and wake up burning. But anyway, but this guy, I mean, but you talk about the wrestlers themselves. Of course, there's rival. I mean, it's a bunch of like sometimes roided up strongman all together. But you know, there's of course there's drama, but by and large, they see them try to take care of each other.
Yeah.
So it really does seem to be kind of a camaraderie thing, like you said.
Yeah, there is a code of honor going on
respect.
there.
It's like, as long as they're not being dicks, they'll be, taken care of.
We're actually going to kind of get into this whole being a dick as a wrestler thing in a little bit, to be honest. Rikidozan was also a 2017 WWE Hall of Fame inductee. Neat. So in Japan, one popular feud that would happen at the time was the trope of the unstoppable foreign invader, someone from a faraway land who seemed unstoppable, but in the face of adversity, the hometown Japanese hero would prevail. Can't imagine why that would be a trope that was pretty big in Japan at the time.
Right?
Yeah.
The world will never know.
If you think about it, it's probably not just the U.S. either. I mean, they've been next to China for a good long while, and it's a pretty big country. Yeah. Well, Rikidozan needed him an unstoppable foreign invader, and the great Antonio fit the bill perfectly. They got him on a plane into Japan and began hyping the hell out of him. They'd have him just do his strongman act. They would have him demonstrate his strength by pulling cars and even 4 Tokyo Transit buses through the city while huge crowds watched on. They'd have him wrestle 5-on-1 matches and have him win. They'd do the whole thing where they'd have him all shackled up in chains and have the managers bring him down and be like, we can't contain this wild, crazy man. Rah! Fans were stoked. Everybody's eating it up. Everybody loved the way this was going. Everybody's wondering, could the national hero Rikidozan defeat this bus-pulling invader and retain the NWA International Championship belt? The answer is yes. Rikidozan won the match, and fans rejoiced. Yeah, right.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. Here's another spoiler. 2 years later, Rikidozan would get drunk at a nightclub, pick a fight with a Yakuza member, and stab to death.
Oh, well,
that's
there
a
you
downer.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a downer.
Yeah.
Like, our national hero.
Well, this tour in Japan was good for the great Antonio's fame. Not so great for his ego, really. During this tour of Japan, those large crowds that were showing up, I mean, they were huge crowds, started to give him kind of a big head, and he started seeing himself as the big draw there. In fact, to the point where he was basically being like, hey, man, people aren't here to see Rikidozan wrestle me. They're here to see me wrestle Rikidozan. And this basically led to great Antonio starting to make more demands while he was on the tour. More money, more food, more drink, upgraded rooms. And just getting tendency for drinking too much and kind of being a little bit of a chode. But Rikidozan and his company were fine with this because they saw that the huge potential that this was and the fact it was going over great with the crowd.
I mean, isn't it always the case? Like, oh, this person's taking off and, they're starting to get a real taste of kind of fame. And then they just ruin it for being just like, oh, no, I'm actually... Suddenly they see themselves bigger than they actually are. And I mean, it's a fine line. You don't want to think you're lesser.
Story as old as time.
Yeah, you don't want to think you're lesser so you get taken advantage of. But at the same time, come on. Come on.
Yeah.
Come on.
Just come on.
I mean, come on. Like, let's be real. You're a strongman in Japan. And let's all acknowledge the Japanese aren't really known for like welcoming in outsiders with open arms. I mean,
very true.
I mean, from what I understand, like if you're visiting, they're totally cool with you. Like they enjoy visitors, like come on, visit, and then go away. But if you're actually wanting to like stay in their society, become one of them, never.
Yeah, be prepared for a lot of stink eyes.
Yeah, you'll always be an outsider.
So, well, Rikidozan was actually fine with Antonio's attitude. Some of the other people on tour were starting to get pretty pissy at him. In fact, one wrestler, Ike Eakins, decided to show his displeasure with Antonio by straight up unleashing a flurry of punches right into Antonio's face in the middle of a match. These punches, by Ike Eakins' own admission, had no effect on Antonio as he just brushed them off like they were nothing. Realizing his punches had no effect on full-grown men, Ike Eakins would then change his last name to Turner, meet up with Tina, and the rest is spousal abuse history.
Sorry, that tickled me. It's like delightfully inappropriate. I love it.
It is delightfully inappropriate. This new inflated ego of Antonio's would stick around the rest of his life and ultimately screw him over a couple of times. More on that soon. We go back to Montreal, Canada, and Antonio continues his lifestyle of local strongman and wrestling personality. He would boast about being as strong as 10 horses, how he could eat 25 chickens or 10 steaks in one sitting.
Yeah, I mean, that's what worked for him. He's not going to he came back and then became a neurologist.
Yeah. I had lots of time thinking while I was on this wrestling tour pulling buses.
One of these days while I was pulling a bus with my hair, I realized, hey, the coefficient of this number is this.
Yeah. When people asked how he got so strong and tough, he stated one of his secrets would be to run 60 meters headfirst into a tree. That's 197 Eagle units, in case you're wondering. Yeah, I kind of doubt the veracity of it. Yeah, he said he would just get a 60-meter head start, just run headfirst into a tree to make himself stronger.
How'd you make yourself stronger? Head trauma.
Yeah. And I guess people were like, really? His response was something along the lines of like, hey, man, everybody has the ability to do this if they want. They just choose not to. And I mean, he's not wrong. Everybody does have the ability to run headfirst into a tree at 60 meters. But I'm going to say, yeah, that's not a wise idea.
Yeah, no. I mean, of course not.
Just because you can doesn't mean you should. I mean, I could jump off the roof of my apartment building right now. I'm not going to.
Plus, I mean, that just, I don't know. Like, say, it makes you wonder how many impressionable people, because there was at least one. I mean,
little Timmy
Yeah. I mean, again, we have a warning on hair dryers not to use them in the shower. So, Lord knows, some asshole was like, "Oh, really? Is that all it takes?" And they ran head first into a tree and died.
Well, also, very famously, back in the 50s when Superman first came out on TV, kids were breaking arms and legs left and right, jumping off their roofs with capes tied around their neck.
Right. Or that famous story about that one kid who like almost shot Christopher. Was it Chris Reeve? Not Christopher Reeve. What was his name?
Steve Reeves.
Steve Reeves, yeah, I knew it was Reeves. I just couldn't remember. Like, but yeah, like he actually had to like, he convinced the kid not to shoot him by saying, "Well, if you shoot me, the bullet will ricochet and hurt your mom." And so the kid's like, "Oh, okay." Instead of going, "Bitch, I'm not." It's a TV show. I'm not. I can't fly anywhere. Although, didn't he kill himself by throwing himself out a window? I mean, I don't know if it was
he killed himself. I don't remember exactly how it was, but I do remember he killed himself.
I mean, I know, I think it was out the window, but then again, people are like, oh, they thought he was Superman. But it's like, well, you can't really ask him a state of mind. Was it like, oh, I'm Superman, I'm going to jump out the window? Or he's like, I can't take this anymore, threw himself out the window.
Oh, wait, not Steve Reeves. George Reeves, I think, might have been the guy.
Is it George Reeves? So, are we wrong twice? We're wrong 3 times in a row.
Yeah, it's George Reeves.
Okay.
I probably said Steve Reeves, and it's like, he died in 2000. I'm like, that's not right. It sounds like Steve Reeves might have been having an affair with a lady and got shot. There you go.
Oh, it was shot? Okay. Well, then I was lied to.
Eventually, the great Antonio would catch the eye of Stu Hart of Stampede Wrestling fame, wrestling legend, and Brett and Owen's daddy. He brought Antonio into the company and had him do a bunch of handicap matches, and that's the one where, they face more than one person. They face like 2, 3, 4, 5 at a time. And he is also a specialist in the Battle Royale matches, which was just a whole lot of people in a ring going at it. And he was also did a lot of matches with Stampede Wrestling's most famous wrestler at the time, Terrible Ted the Wrestling Bear. Yes, it's a real bear, and Antonio and Terrible Ted would have a series of matches, man versus beast, who would win, and they always ended in a draw. The question of man versus beast was never truly answered in these matches. He had a muzzle on and stuff, and, it's kind of those things where the bear looked pretty drugged for the most part, and is like...
Yeah, I was going to say...
You can actually see some footage of it. It's like Great Antonio and the bear like get in the middle of the ring, kind of like hug a little bit and like shove each other just a touch, and...
I was curious how that happened.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah. But on that note, Stampede Wrestling had a wrestling bear for a lot of years. That means Bret Hart might have wrestled a bear as a little kid. Speaking of which, Bret Fart.
Yes, Bret Fart.
Bret Hart was a fan of the great Antonio, and there's even a cute little story about this. When Bret Hart was a wee little Canuck, him and his brother were horsing around when Bret's brother got a little too rough and hurt Bret. The brother made a deal with the hurt and crying Bret. Don't tell on me, and I'll get you a signed picture of that wrestler you really like. Bret agreed and soon was given a signed picture of the great Antonio, which Bret Hart said was his most cherished signed photo he had as a little kid. 1971, the great Antonio went to Calgary and competed in the Stampede North American Heavyweight Championship and almost won the Heavyweight Championship belt, but the fans actually rioted before the match could finish. Alberta wrestling coach Percival A. Friend, yeah, that's his name, Percival A. Friend, recalls the night. The people of Calgary had never seen such a vicious competitor and didn't like the idea of an ugly guy with long hair beating the local favorite and becoming their champion. So the fans started freaking out, throwing trash in, rushing the ring, and disrupted enough that they just basically had to call off the match at the time, which that was kind of one of those things that actually did happen a fair amount back then in those days in the smaller venues, non-televised stuff. A lot of weird stuff went down in those little small wrestling halls. People like Jake the Snake tell some interesting stories, and Roddy Piper. It would literally be like, it's just like you start screaming and doing the crowd. Next thing you know, you're in a fist fight in the middle of the ring with a guy.
I mean, that's a hell of a pressure. It's like, oh, the crowd can literally at any moment decide to rebel.
Yeah. Jake the Snake Roberts had like a 70 or 80-year-old lady pull a handgun on him after a match once. She
Oh,
was just
wow.
like, I don't like you, mister. And apparently he had to actually kind of like talk the lady down a little bit.
I mean, it's like, it's fake, lady. I mean,
Yeah, it's real to her. The start of the 1970s were good to Antonio. He was traveling the world doing strongman exhibitions, wrestling shows, and appearing on the likes of The Ed Sullivan Show, The Johnny Carson Show, and NBC's Real People. He was also on a ton of small-time variety shows out in his neck of the woods in Canada too. And it would be on these shows that we would learn Great Antonio has actually a really good singing voice, and he loves to show it off by singing on these shows. You can actually hear him on an album. Some people like a band put some of his singing on an album as a bonus track. He's actually pretty good. In fact, he really wanted to actually tour as a singer and be on a double bill with Tiny Tim. Great Antonio and Tiny Tim would be an interesting concert to see.
Tiny Tim,
yeah, he was a tiptoe by the window through the garden.
I flashed like Scrooge. I was like, what?
Oh yeah, no, the large ukulele singer dude. You remember him now?
Oh, okay.
Tiptoe by the window through the garden. Google a picture of him and you'll see what he looks like, and you'll be like, "Oh, that weird dude."
Are you talking about the guy like not the Hawaiian dude who sang "Over the Rainbow," right?
Nope, not that dude.
Okay. Yep, there he is. He is weird looking.
He is very strange looking. He looks like something that would swallow your soul. The great Antonio, at this time, owned what he claimed was the largest rocking chair in the world, which measured 2 meters wide and 4 meters high. That's 6.5 feet wide and 13 feet high, and he looks mighty tiny sitting in that thing. No word on if whether or not it is actually the biggest rocking chair in the world, but that's what he hyped it up as. And if you look at one of those pictures, you can actually see him in it too, sitting in that giant chair.
I do see him in the giant chair. Is
Yeah.
he chained to it? Is that for some reason my brain translates as he was just.
No, I think it's just the way his arms are out, spread across.
Yeah, it just looks. It's also really small on my screens.
At this point in the 70s, he was reportedly earning enough money to buy himself a brand new custom Lincoln Continental every 2 years. But
That's not bad.
No, that's not bad at all, actually. I mean, if I could afford a brand new luxury car every 2 years, I would consider that, quote unquote, having it made or making it, quote unquote. I mean, it doesn't mean you're like mega rich, but it means you're making all right money.
Yeah, totally.
And you're also not making so much money that you're going to screw yourself over doing something stupid. But he wanted more than the Lincoln Continental, Nathan. In fact, around this time, he approached Boeing and offered them a deal to help promote their 747 jet. He went to Boeing and said, I'll pull one of those 747s down the tarmac to hype it up for you, and in exchange, you give me one for my own personal jet. To make one of those, it cost $24 million back then, or $167 million in today's money. So Boeing declined his offer. But hey, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right?
True. Very true.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it's not like Boeing's going to throw him in the clink for asking something stupid like that. They'll just be like, no, or ignore him. So, I mean,
like, dude, no. Like, why would you think we would do that? Like, ever?
Well, I mean, maybe he actually was running into trees at 60 meters head first.
Yeah. That's the only explanation.
And that's going to do it for this half of our Great Antonio episode. Next episode, we'll start off talking about the famous event Bill Burr did a routine for. We'll also talk about Antonio's dealings with Don King and Tiger Woods, and we'll talk about the Burt's Bees guy for some reason. This and more on the next episode of Off to Off Topic. This is where the ending jingle goes. This is where the ending jingle goes. I don't know if we need one. I don't know if we'll get one. But if we do, then here is where it goes.